Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled to have with me as my guest and a close friend and colleague as well, Nader Mousavi, who's a partner at Sullivan Cromwell. Nader, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Richard. I'm delighted and honored to be your guest. And as I was just saying to you, particularly flattered to be amongst such illustrious company as your other folks that you've interviewed on your great podcast. So thank you for including me.
Well, thank you. So, Nader, let me start by asking you why you went to law school in the first place.
So, I didn't make the most intentional decision. I was told a fair amount growing up when I was involved in some debate or this or that, student government in high school, that you would make a great lawyer someday. And but I really had no idea what that meant in practice. When I finished college and was getting ready to decide what the next steps were, I felt that law school was sort of a natural next step for me, and maybe it was preordained by all those inputs along the way. But my philosophy was that I would apply to law schools, and if I got into a really great law school, I would go. And I was also very interested in political economy, in international relations, and a variety of other areas, subject matter areas. And I was actually admitted to the Stanford Johns Hopkins SICE program for advanced international relations as a co-degree with my law school degree at Stanford. So I was thinking about a variety of different paths at that time. And, really growing up in LA, I had an immigrant family. Education was sort of paramount in terms of the way we thought about the world and the way my parents instilled in me what it meant to be successful. And really the pinnacle of all of that for me was Stanford. And I had idolized it growing up. And really the minute I got into Stanford Law School, and this could have applied depending on your geography to a variety of other schools as well. But really the minute I got into that school, I knew that I was going to go, and from that perspective onwards, I was as delighted as you could be to sort of be on that ride.
So when did you kind of figure out what kind of lawyer you wanted to do? Did you have kind of an idea, or did you try different things? How did you end up kind of doing the area of law that you are currently doing?
Well, that's actually not going to be. I'll try to keep this a short story. When I got to law school, I really had no idea.
Okay.
I was interested in trying and seeing everything. My first summer, I clerked for a federal judge. My second summer, I split between the Justice Department and a New York law firm. And I was trending towards an interest in antitrust and competition law, which for me brought together some of my interests in economy and political economy as well. And then when I got to the time of graduation and was making a decision about where to spend my career, and I had the law firm offers that you'd expect to have at that point, I decided to do something extremely unconventional. And I joined a startup, a software startup that had been co-founded by a few friends of mine from college.
Oh, really?
And this was in '97. So it was really on the sort of the steep uplift of, the boom, the dot-com boom. But it was just before a lot of other classmates of mine, began doing that. So in my recollection, I think I was the only person in my class to make that move, and I sort of divided my friends and mentors with the decision. I would say the majority viewed it as a reckless and foolish decision, including some professors that I really respected, and then in a minority thought it was a bold, brave, and exciting opportunity. So I ended up doing it, notwithstanding, I think, the headwinds at the time. And
Huh.
my decision to do it was really based on sort of this core compass that I had, which is I had decided that I wanted to spend my career in tech, but having gone through undergrad and really straight through to law school, I didn't feel that I had any business
Mm.
advising tech companies on how they should be doing deals without having sort of walked a mile in those shoes. So
Hmm.
I felt like it was the right step for me to
Hmm.
give me a grounding in the actual business of being in a tech company. And I got a lot of exposure. Not only did I lead the legal affairs function for this fast growing software company, but I got exposure to business development. I learned how to use Excel as we were figuring out pricing models. I ended up overseeing the installation of, this was a telecom company, switching infrastructure.
Hmm.
So I got to really understand how a company operates across the different disciplines, the challenges, I mean, numerous near death experiences.
Yeah, right.
But that really, from a business perspective, near death, of course. Um, um, and, some of the, the lows and the highs of going through a fast growth company. And when I entered into this adventure, I made the explicit calculus that, look, I felt that I had a really good chance of getting another law firm job in the future.
Mhm.
But I did, if this didn't work out, but I did have in mind, and I actually wrote down as my key risk going into this was that if the company fails at the same time as there's a large macroeconomic downturn, that's where I would really be exposed for having made this decision.
Hmm.
And that's exactly what happened. and so the company failed. We were in registration to go public.
No,
We had
interesting.
combined with another larger company and had, really a great shot on goal. Um, but the markets had turned down. The dot-com bust was devastating. It devastated our target market as well.
Hmm.
And so while the company had a lot of money in the bank and had achieved, unicorn status in terms of its valuation, even back in 2000, it was really not going to get out of the gates. And so at that time, through the acquisition that I mentioned, the combination, I ended up, bless you, I ended up in Boston. Our outside counsel was a firm called, at the time, Hale and Dorr. It's now Wilmer Hale.
Hmm.
And I was a client of the firm, and I went and had a meeting with the chair of the corporate department and let them know that I was going to be leaving the company and I was interested in joining them. And he let me know that I wouldn't have an opportunity to work in their M&A or securities group if I, quote, walked on water, because it was a challenging time in that area. But the tech transactions practice, of which I had significant experience doing software in licensing, out licensing, and other commercial transactions for the software company I was in house at, was extremely busy. And so
Hmm.
I met all the folks in that practice. They were fantastic. And I said, great, I'd be happy to do that. So I, while I was exposed a lot to the tech transactions practice, being inside this tech company and
Yeah.
leading all the transactions across the board, the decision to do this as a career and within a law firm sort of evolved by happenstance and
Hmm.
serendipity. And
Hmm.
even then, I thought I might do it for 2, 3 years, really just kind of get my grounding,
Yeah.
and then look to see what the next adventure would be. But to my own surprise, really, uh, especially having straight out of the gates, out of law school, to my own surprise, I found the practice to be extremely exhilarating, extremely satisfying, challenging. I was constantly close to, and you know this, Richard, as a practitioner, a former practitioner in this area, you always have to learn about what the technology is of your client in order to figure out how to transact around it. If you're going to
Yeah.
license something, you need to know what the something is,
Yeah.
what embodies the four corners of it, what it does not include, how it's going to be used, where it's going to be used, what the boundaries of that are. So all of those inquiries that are sort of necessary inquiries to doing a transaction successfully in this area, whether it's a pharmaceutical or a piece of software or a semiconductor or a patent, those inquiries were all fundamentally business-driven inquiries that, for me, felt like it gave me continuity and connection with what I had set out to do in my first 4 years of practice in-house. But suddenly I was doing that in a context where I was getting to do that not only for a single company with a single product and a single market, but dozens of companies across different industries, different technologies, different stages of growth, different business models. So suddenly for me, I felt like I was doing the most interesting part of what I had been exposed to, but I was getting to do it for dozens of companies. So I was sort of like a kid in a candy store. I also couldn't believe, because I was so conscious of managing budgets as an in-house counsel, I was always very aware of the clicking clock when I was talking to outside counsel. I felt like I had been freed from that because I was in-house. I found it amazing that I could, no, excuse me, in a firm, now that I could go around and talk to any lawyer in the firm and ask them anything I wanted, and I wasn't going to get charged for it. So I felt like I was I had this wealth of knowledge and information and expertise that I could tap and learn from. And something about that also was really appealing to me. It's probably, referred to sometimes as the ivory tower, but that also was something that I really loved.
Well, that's so interesting because I mean, that's very rare to see somebody whose initial experience is in-house and then flip to a law firm. Obviously, you see the reverse way more. Let me ask you, most people who obviously work in-house, one of the reasons they like in-house is they're, very intimately involved in the business. They get to wear a lot of different hats. Do you miss that at all? Or, I mean, is that something you feel like, I mean, because usually that's what lawyers like about being in-house.
I would say yes, of course. There's aspects of that I miss. But I feel like I gained so much more in the career path that I'm in, where I'm I'm constantly being exposed to client transactions and needs and issues, problems that are the kinds of problems or transactions that they either can't solve internally or really feel like they're better off getting outside counsel involved. So you're already have this cut in a sense where you're doing the more interesting and complicated work. And I think that's probably even more the case at a firm like ours. So that is something where, when I was in-house, I was in a particularly flat organization as the only lawyer there, where I did everything from the lease on the copy machine to the negotiation of the sale of the entire company and everything in between. And, while the overall experience, I wouldn't trade for anything, notwithstanding, the end result of that company. Now as I'm fortunate to have had that experience. Now I really thrive on the complexity and challenge of the clients that come to us with really interesting and complicated issues, deals where we have to, really put our thinking caps on, be very pragmatic, and work as teams. These aren't a lot of times these are issues or transactions that are more complicated than any one person can solve because they have antitrust dimensions, they have export dimensions, they have tax dimensions, corporate overlays, and so that aspect of it, quarterbacking, the resolution of complex issues, solving issues that are novel, coming up with structures that no one's done before, and convincing a counterparty who's not comfortable with that this makes sense. Those are the kinds of things that are very exhilarating for me, that keep me amongst the things that keep me really enjoying what I do.
Hmm.
And while I think that's possible to achieve some of what I described in-house with that, inevitably in-house you have one client, one industry,
Hmm.
and one mission. And
Hmm.
so I think the opportunity to dabble in across many clients and industries, or really not just dabble, but to delve into
Hmm.
and then pull out and go into another deep dive is something that I've come to really enjoy and find to be a great way to keep learning and progressing.
Now, how would you describe your current practice? I know you do a lot of interesting kind of transactions now. How do you very generally describe your practice these days?
Yeah, I view myself as a deal maker where the subject of the deal is really driven by technology or IP,
Hmm.
and that can be really any industry. I know it's very common for people to associate deal makers with life sciences, and that's a separate silo. And then, software, networking, semiconductor, and that's a silo. Um, I think that's one of the things I've enjoyed most early in my career for the first 9 years, while I was with Hale and Dorr and then Wilmer. The majority of what I did was in life sciences. And then before that, of course, it was software and networking. And
Hmm.
then since then, it's been, balanced. Um, but I find that doing deals across these different industries um, enables a little bit of pattern recognition and also the opportunity to borrow tricks of the trade and structures and approaches that are used in life sciences, for example, in a sophisticated technology collaboration between players where some of the elements are really more akin to
Hmm.
a biotech pharma
Hmm.
transaction. So my practice is very diverse from an industry perspective. It involves a combination of M&A and joint venture transactions, as well as what I would call standalone IP and technology transactions across
Hmm.
all these different industries. And then I have to overlay to kind of have a more complete answer. My role within my practice and at SNC is, I joined SNC in 2010 as a very rare lateral partner in the United States, and the mission that I had at the time, which was a mission I was very excited about, was to really establish and grow the IP and tech transactions practice of S&C to be commensurate with the quality of the practices across all the other areas that it's focused in.
Hmm.
And so that's what I've been doing, for the last 12 years. And I feel that, and the input that I get as well, is that we've really accomplished that. And at the same time, there's always more one can do to grow. So a lot of what I do and focus on in my role is, um, you know, the management of that group, along with my partner in New York, who I recruited as a summer associate and mentored throughout his career. And one of the great uh, gratifications that I have in what I do is the mentorship and giving back aspect. So seeing folks that you've known since the start of their career coming through the ranks, overcoming and helping them and coaching them to overcome challenges, and to rise to the level of being a peer and a colleague in the partnership ranks is really a wonderful story as well in terms of the gratification I get out of my practice.
Hmm. So when you kind of look back now at your career and that you start off, are you glad you made that decision? I mean, it sounds like it all worked out pretty well. I mean, is that what you'd say?
Yeah, I am. I mentioned, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I think the decision you're talking about was to go straight in house.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and but I am, I don't advise. When I'm asked, sometimes I'm asked by Stanford Law School to talk to a student
Yeah.
who is thinking about doing that similar move, and um, you know, I I really focus on the risks. And at the time when I made the decision, one of my professors, a really trusted mentor for me, a securities professor, said law school is a call option to become a lawyer, and you don't exercise the call unless you go to a law firm and get the training that a law firm provides. And that professor is fundamentally right on that advice. And while I had great experience, and that experience happened to be what this internal compass of mine compelled me to go sort of do at that moment. And I, did it with eyes wide open about the risks. I really think that unless that bar is that this is going to be an opportunity that you will never forgive yourself for passing up. And, because the bar has to be really quite high. But, for me, yeah, I mean, I have the most unusual career path to become, a practice group leader at a, top firm like SNC. I really feel like it was very fortunate that it worked out, but I wouldn't, I realize how lucky I was. And so I'm very, circumspect about suggesting others, I use the don't try this at home moniker for this career path. But of course, I'm absolutely delighted, and I feel like my approach to advising clients was very significantly formed in those early days because I was a consumer of legal services. So I developed my views on what was useful advice versus not useful advice completely based on having real problems that I had to solve and getting, at times, advice that said, well, there's 3 options and here are the pros and cons, and then that was the end. And I found that to be really, not useful because, the task is how do you apply judgment to those options and those pros and cons in order to come to a view about what the right decision is. And so I always take that approach where, even today, I will give a view. It's the client's decision.
Right.
But I will say what I would do if I were in their shoes. I would say why. I would say even if there's this or that risk attendant to that decision, I think that's a reasonable risk to take under these circumstances for these reasons. And that type of pragmatic kind of commercial perspective is something that I really derived from those first 4 years of my foray, no matter how foolish it was objectively. And it's something that I try to instill in the lawyers that I work with that are associates coming up through the ranks, and how to think about things, and not to give just a legal answer, but what are the consequences of that decision, and where does that answer, if you do give that answer, where does that leave you?
Well, Nader, I really appreciate your taking the time. I've known you for many years, but it's super interesting. I did not know that part of your career, so I was glad to learn that, and it was great to hear your story.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This is Richard Hsu and Nader Mousavi. Thanks.